Some leaders build walls taller than their fears. Ibrahim Traoré chose a different path. He chose the road, the soil, the heartbeat of his people. The early sun rose like hope over Ouagadougou, brushing the dusty streets with gold. Markets yawned awake. Vendors stretched their voices into the air, calling prices with a rhythm that sounded like a prayer for survival. Children zigzagged across the alleys, chasing laughter instead of dreams. The scent of roasted meat clung to the breeze as motorcycles buzzed like restless bees. Through this living symphony stepped a young president who refused to rule from glass towers. No armored convoy, no shield of tinted steel. Just Ibrahim, his boots sinking into the same earth as everyone else. His guards followed from afar because he insisted on it. He wanted to hear the truth directly from the streets. He wanted to breathe the same air as the people who trusted him with their tomorrow. Each walk grounded him, reminded him why he fought, why he risked everything. Then destiny stirred as he turned toward the central market. The crowd blurred, but one figure crystallized into sharp memory. Under the tired shade of an ancient baobab tree sat a man whose clothes were so faded that color itself seemed to have given up on them. His hands trembled slightly as he held a worn-out book, his spine bent with age but not defeat. Ibrahim's heart paused, because he knew that posture. He knew that voice of dignity and silence. He knew that spirit before he even saw the face. Professor Ismail. In a flash, Ibrahim was no longer president. He was a young cadet again, sitting in a cramped classroom while a fiery teacher carved courage into the minds of students who could barely afford notebooks. He remembered chalk dust flying like sparks from a fire. He remembered one line that shaped his life forever. Knowledge is the only wealth that grows when you give it away. Now here he was, forgotten, alone. The weight in Ibrahim's chest pressed like a fist of sorrow and fury. How could the country forget one of its builders? How many Ismails were still suffering in silence? Ibrahim approached quietly. His voice came out softer than he intended. Professor Ismail. The pages stopped turning. The old man looked up slowly, like waking from a long dream. His eyes searched the young man's face. Confusion, recognition, trembling disbelief. Ibrahim? A smile cracked like sunlight through storm clouds. Ismail tried to stand, but his knees buckled. Ibrahim stepped forward instantly, catching him with gentle strength. The professor felt frighteningly light, as if the world had been stealing pieces of him one hardship at a time. It has been far too long, Ibrahim said, and too many things have changed, the professor replied with a faint laugh. Except you. You still walk among the people. He looked away, almost ashamed. I didn't expect the president himself to stop for an old ghost like me. Don't call me president, Ibrahim insisted. You are my teacher. Without you, there would be no Ibrahim leading this nation. The professor's smile faded. His eyes dimmed with old pain. I am not the man you remember, life. It has not been kind. What happened? Ibrahim asked, his voice low but urgent. Ismail swallowed his pride like a bitter stone. My pension disappeared into debts. 40 years teaching young men to rise, and now I can barely afford bread. Food prices grow every day, but my pension remains frozen as if I'm already dead. I tried tutoring children, literature, mathematics, whatever I could offer. Then my health failed. So I sold my books. Imagine that. A teacher selling knowledge to survive. His voice cracked. Not from age, from humiliation. Pieces of silence fell between them. The marketplace kept roaring, but for these two souls time had gone still. Ibrahim's jaw clenched. His eyes grew sharp, not at the professor, but at the injustice coiled around him like a parasite. The professor whispered, For the first time in my life, Ibrahim, I feel forgotten. The young leader felt a fire rise inside him. This wasn't just one man's pain. This was a national wound. He placed a hand over Ismail's shaking fingers. You are not forgotten. The professor looked up, searching for truth in Ibrahim's eyes. I promise you, Ibrahim said, voice steady as stone. No teacher in Burkina Faso will ever suffer like this again. Not while I breathe. Those words landed heavy. They weren't a statement, they were a vow. Yet beneath the vow lurked a darker truth. If one professor was abandoned, how many? Others had already fallen. Ibrahim looked toward the horizon, where the sun painted a bright morning. It suddenly felt like a lie. He had stepped outside to feel the pulse of his nation, and what he found was a heart breaking quietly in the shadows. He knew what had to happen next. This would not end at the market. This was just the beginning. The professor squeezed his hand with surprising strength. "Be careful, Ibrahim," he murmured. "When you fight for the forgotten, the powerful never stay silent." Ibrahim nodded, a storm forming in his gaze. "Let them speak," he said. The road ahead just grew dangerous, and far more necessary. Ibrahim realized this wasn't just the story of one forgotten teacher. It was the silent tragedy of thousands. Teachers who shaped futures yet couldn't afford their own. Nurses who saved lives but lost their dignity. Civil servants who gave their youth to the country and found nothing waiting for them in old age. The professor's voice trembled. "Hunger I can bear. Cold I can endure. What hurts most is becoming invisible. People I once taught. Parents who once thanked me. They walk by like I don't exist. Like I died and no one bothered to bury my memory." His hands shook as he whispered the question that had been eating him alive. Was it all meaningless, Ibrahim? Did my entire life amount to nothing? When society throws you away, you start to believe you never mattered. Those words stabbed deeper than any blade. Ibrahim felt his eyes burn. This man had once lit the fire of purpose inside him. Now that same fire was being smothered by neglect and shame. He gripped his teacher's hand gently, but with the strength of a promise carved in stone. "Not in my country," Ibrahim said. "Not while I live." Ismail stared at him, disbelief and hope wrestling in his eyes. "You think too highly of an old fool," he whispered. "You are not a fool," Ibrahim responded firmly. "You are a pillar. If we allow the pillars to crumble, this house we call a nation will fall on all of us." The noise of the market softened. Heads turned. People recognized the teacher they once admired. They recognized the president who chose the streets over palaces. Whispers spread like sparks on dry grass. "That's the professor. He taught my cousin. He helped me pass my exams. He shaped leaders." The crowd didn't see a poor old man anymore. They saw a legend fallen by neglect. Ibrahim didn't glance at the cameras or the guards. This moment was bigger than politics. This was justice waking up. "Come with me," he said, extending his hand. "We are done letting heroes suffer in silence." Ismail hesitated. Pride fought with need. "I don't want charity," he murmured. "All I have left is my dignity." "This is not charity," Ibrahim answered softly. "This is the debt we owe you. A country that forgets its teachers forgets its future." The professor finally placed his hand in Ibrahim's. Not in surrender. In hope. The walk to the vehicle felt like crossing a border, from dust and pain into possibility. Ismail's steps were slow but symbolic, like a man learning to rise again. Inside the car, clean leather replaced the smell of dust. Quiet replaced the noise of survival. Yet Ibrahim's thoughts were far from calm. He saw more than one forgotten professor. He saw a broken system tightening a noose around every honest worker. "Where are we going?" Ismail asked, his voice barely more than a breath. Ibrahim stared ahead, determination sharpening his jaw. "To rewrite the rules," he said. "We will start with one life, and then we'll save thousands." The car turned toward the towering headquarters of the Burkina Development Bank, a place where numbers mattered more than people, where pensions disappeared behind signatures and locks. Inside, bank manager Musa was sipping tea and reviewing paperwork, unaware that justice was walking through his door. A reckoning was coming, not with bullets, with dignity, sharpened into power, and Ibrahim was ready to strike. At the Burkina Development Bank, the machinery of money was grinding as usual. Pen strokes and signatures controlled destinies. Numbers meant survival or suffering. Manager Musa had no idea his day was about to change history. "Sir." President Traore is here, on foot. The secretary's voice cracked with shock. Musa froze mid-signature, ink bleeding into paper. 15 years of service and never a surprise presidential visit. Presidents usually arrived in armored parades, not in dusty shoes, holding a frail old man wearing yesterday's struggles. The lobby doors slid open. Silence followed Ibrahim inside. Musa forced a smile, his nervous fingers adjusting his tie. "Mr. President, this is an honor. How may we assist?" Ibrahim stepped aside and gestured to the elderly man beside him. "This is Professor Ismail Zongo. He shaped generations of minds. He shaped me, yet he sleeps under the open sky because his pension has abandoned him. That ends today." The words echoed through marble and fear. Every clerk stopped typing. Every customer stopped pretending life was normal. A bank full of strangers suddenly shared the same heartbeat. Musa swallowed. This wasn't politics. This was Judgment Day. "What do you require, Mr. President?" Ibrahim didn't hesitate. "I want a national dignity fund. Teachers, nurses, civil servants. The builders of our nation must never again be left to rot in the shadows. We fix it now." Musa blinked. This was not a symbolic handshake for cameras. This was rewriting the rules. Such a project requires enormous capital, coordination, approvals. "Then we start before approvals," Ibrahim cut in, voice sharp enough to slice red tape. "Emergency relief within 48 hours. Lives cannot wait for signatures." A phone camera lifted discreetly behind a counter. Social media was already devouring the moment. Ismail finally found his voice. "Ibrahim, I cannot allow you to help only me. Dignity must be shared or it becomes charity." Ibrahim smiled softly at the first lesson he had ever learned. "You taught me that a leader serves the many. What begins with one becomes a movement." The professor lowered his eyes, overwhelmed. He wasn't saved. The system was being redeemed. 2 hours later, Musa returned with a plan in trembling hands. With government support, 3,000 retired teachers and 5,000 other public servants qualify immediately. "Do it," Ibrahim ordered, "and report directly to me, because this wasn't a show. This was justice being dragged into daylight." That night, the nation shook. A retired nurse posted through tears. "I saved others' lives. I never thought anyone would save mine." A former agricultural advisor wrote, "I gave farmers the tools to grow. Now finally, someone grows hope for me." The message spread faster than corruption could hide. "Honor our heroes. Burkina rises. We remember across Africa, leaders watched." Some applauded. Some panicked. The next morning, cameras packed the courtyard. Professor Ismail stood beside the president, clean clothes replacing despair. His shoulders no longer sagged. His voice, once fragile, carried like a sermon. "For 40 years I taught that dignity is a human birthright. Today, I saw those lessons become law," applause thundered. Some cried, some saluted. A new revolution had begun, not forged in fire, but in compassion with a backbone. 6 months later, Burkina Faso no longer felt forgotten. The Dignity for Service program was not a slogan. It was a lifeline. A grandmother who delivered 2,000 babies finally slept on a real mattress. A farm mentor returned to his fields, teaching youth for free. Joy replacing hunger. Smiles replaced silence. Hope replaced humiliation. And Professor Ismail, he was no longer the fragile man under the baobab tree. He was reborn, a symbol, a spark lighting the nation. Yet deep in the halls of power, jealous eyes watched the president's rising star. Greedy hands began to tremble with fear. Corrupt officials whispered, "If Traore can empower the people, who will need us anymore?" The storm was gathering. Heroes always attract enemies. The morning sun poured over the national stadium like a blessing. Flags fluttered, voices buzzed, and a sea of people waited to witness something their country had never done before. A celebration of those who once served and were forgotten. A day that now honored them as the backbone of the nation. President Ibrahim Traoré stood at the entrance tunnel watching wheelchairs, walking sticks, and proud old uniforms line up behind the stage. Nurses with silver hair, retired soldiers with medals too faded to shine, teachers whose voices had shaped generations. They had spent lifetimes giving. Today, the country finally gave back. His eyes found the man who had sparked this movement. Professor Ismail stepped onto the track with a steady stride. He was no longer the frail, shivering survivor from the market. He walked with shoulders lifted by pride. The crowd noticed too. Whispers turned into cheers, and cheers into applause so thunderous that the ground itself trembled. A stadium once used for sports now became a temple of gratitude. Ismail was escorted toward the stage where a podium decorated with fresh white flowers awaited him. Behind it, a massive banner read, "Heroes Recognition Day, Dignity for Those Who Served." The announcer's voice echoed through every speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for Professor Ismail, the first guardian of dignity." The audience stood as one. The old teacher blinked quickly, trying to keep his emotions from overflowing. Months ago, people ignored him on the street. Now thousands waited to hear him breathe. He placed his trembling hands on the podium. When he spoke, his voice filled the air like music. 6 months ago, I felt invisible, forgotten by the country I loved. I believed my years of service were nothing but dust in the wind. Today, I have learned something new. A nation remembers. When a leader chooses to remember, a wave of applause. Some cried openly, others held their breath. In front of me sit hundreds of heroes who once carried the weight of this land, he continued. Teachers who lit the first spark of knowledge. Nurses who fought death with their bare hands. Civil servants who kept this country standing through storms and darkness. You are not ghosts. You are the soul of this nation. President Traore watched from the front row, every word from his mentor carved deeper into his heart. This program was no longer policy. It was healing. The professor raised a hand, asking the crowd not to cheer but to listen. Dignity is not a favor. It is our right. We gave our best years to this land, and today this land gives us back our worth. We thank our president, not because he sits in power, but because he walked into the market and saw what others refused to see. The camera zoomed in on Ibrahim. Tears did not fall, but his eyes glistened with emotion he didn't try to hide. The professor's voice grew stronger. Leadership is not standing above your people. Leadership is kneeling beside them, seeing them, lifting them. The stadium erupted, flags waving, drums rolling, people chanting his name, not as a celebrity, as a symbol of what they could be. But this day wasn't just speeches. One by one, veterans of the nation stepped forward to share their truth. A retired midwife clutched the microphone with hands that had delivered hundreds of babies. I spent 30 years bringing life into this world. Yet after retirement, I couldn't afford my own medicines. This program gave me back my health and with it, my purpose. A former police officer spoke next, straightening his uniform. For years, I protected citizens. Then I had to choose between food and the medicine that keeps me alive. Today I choose life, the audience clapped, not politely, fiercely. Every testimony was a strike against the injustice of past neglect. Numbers flashed across the stadium screens. 1,000 lives restored. 8,000 families saved. 8,000 forgotten heroes finally seen. A young nurse in the crowd whispered to her friend, "One day that could be us." That single sentence revealed the impact. Service no longer meant dying in silence. It meant earning honor. Professor Ismail returned for the closing words. The stadium fell still. "Success is what you achieve for yourself," he said. "Significance is what you achieve for others." Today, our president chose significance. Traore stepped on stage. The crowd roared. For a moment, he didn't speak. He just held the microphone and looked around at the faces shining with hope. My teacher once told me, "Every human carries dignity," he began. "When I saw him suffering in the market, the nation's dignity was suffering with him. So I made myself a promise. As long as I breathe, no citizen who served this country will live unseen." Thunderous applause. Some people stamped their feet. Even the security guards smiled. "Let this day be the first of many," he declared. "Because we are not just giving pensions. We are giving back pride, and pride builds nations." Together, he and Professor Ismail lifted a ceremonial torch. Flames rose, bright and defiant, a symbol that the dignity of the people would never again burn out. The crowd chanted, "Dignity for all! Dignity for all!" As the sun dipped behind the stadium, the air crackled with possibility. Children waved flags. Elders wiped tears. A new belief spread across Burkina Faso. Hope was no longer a speech. Hope was real. Hope was home again. And the story of a forgotten teacher had become the fire that awakened a nation. 6 months had passed since that unforgettable morning in the bank. What began as a quiet act of compassion between a president and his struggling old teacher had grown into a transformation of an entire nation. Burkina Faso no longer felt like the same country. Schools that were once short on teachers were now filled with experienced educators, volunteering out of pure will. Clinics that struggled to guide new nurses now had retired midwives offering wisdom that could not be found in any textbook. In the countryside, young farmers gathered around elders who once shaped agriculture, but had been forced into silence by poverty. The land itself seemed to stand taller. This was no miracle. It was a choice, a decision to honor those who had spent their lives serving others. On a bright December morning, the National Stadium in Ouagadougou buzzed with energy. Crowds filled every seat. People waved flags and held banners with handwritten messages. We honor our heroes. Service is dignity. Burkina Faso remembers. Large portraits of teachers. Nurses, civil servants, and soldiers lined the entryway. These were the hands that built the nation. Today, they finally received the gratitude they deserved. President Ibrahim Traoré walked through the tunnel beneath the rows of cheering citizens. His eyes scanned the field until they found the man who had changed everything by simply existing and being seen. Professor Ismail stood near the main stage, wearing clean traditional clothes, ironed perfectly, dignity restored. Where once there was shame in his eyes, now there was purpose. A loud announcement filled the stadium. Ladies and gentlemen, kindly rise for Professor Ismail Zongo, the first guardian of dignity. The title struck deep in hearts everywhere. Cameras flashed. People stood with respect usually reserved for national heroes, because that is what he had become. Ismail stepped slowly toward the podium. Each step told a story of knowledge, service, suffering, and redemption. He paused at the microphone and looked across the stadium. For a moment, he simply allowed himself to breathe it in. His voice began as a whisper that carried like wind. Not long ago, I believed my life was finished. That after giving my best years to education, there was nothing left for me but waiting for the end, alone and forgotten. Silence spread like a blanket. Thousands listened without blinking. But today, I stand before you as proof that a nation does not lose its humanity until it chooses to stop caring. A thunder of applause followed, echoing off the stadium walls. Yet he raised a gentle hand for quiet. We are gathered here for a new celebration. A celebration of those who worked silently while others slept. Those who saved lives without expecting applause. Those who guarded justice, swept the streets, taught our children, vaccinated our babies, protected our borders. He scanned a sea of wrinkled yet proud faces. You carried this country. Now this country will carry you. People in the stands started crying. Some waved to the heroes sitting on the stage. For the first time in decades, the nation looked its elders in the eyes and said, "Thank you." President Traoré watched with a heavy heart. He knew the world would applaud this program. He knew reporters would call it visionary. Yet none of that mattered more than the joy on his teacher's face. The professor continued, "Our president did not rescue one man. He rescued national honor. He reminded us that dignity is not a privilege. It is a right." The applause became unstoppable. The crowd shouted the president's name. Drums joined in. A young girl lifted a small sign that read, "One act of kindness can rebuild a country."